Hello everyone, and welcome to this crisis event, and very actually sad occasion. It's a terrible thing when this happens in Israel, as it reflects awfully here. As I was saying, it's awful when this happens in Israel because often anti-Semitism spikes in the UK, and students, former friends who they often go to university with and go out with, can turn against them. And as a non-profit educational organisation, it's our role essentially to help these students wherever we can and equip them with the skills that they need to combat anti-Semitism when they see it. So thank you very much for being here. I hope you get something out of this. I'm sure it'll be a fantastic talk. If you do have any questions, please do just pop them in the chat. And with that, I'm going to hand over to our fantastic Director of Education, Charlotte Korchak. Thank you.
All right, hi everyone. To answer the comment, yes, it is being recorded, which also I think needs to be announced technically, legally in the UK, right? This meeting is being recorded. Okay, there we go. Hi everyone, I'm Charlotte. Most of you know me. I think I'm not going to take any time introducing myself. I'm the senior educator at Stand With Us. I've been working at this organization for 11 years now. And yeah, that's all. Clearly I'm an American, but right now I am in Jerusalem. So I do just want you guys to understand kind of my state of mind right now is not exactly the most stable considering everything that is happening around me. But let's power through this. So what I want to do is I want to just give a brief understanding of how we got to where we are right now. And then open it up for questions because I know many of you are facing questions. Can everyone just please make sure to mute themselves as there's kind of interference that I'm hearing. So if you could just double check that you're muted. I definitely am still hearing that somebody's not muted. Or Rafi, do you mind going through and making sure that trying to mute people who are unmuted? Thank you. So I want to go through, like I said, what's going on, what got us here, and then open it up for your questions. Okay, seriously, somebody needs to mute themselves. I don't know about you all, but I can't. Wow, that is very frustrating. Okay. And then I'll open it up for Q&A. I know a lot of students are facing they're seeing a lot of posts, they're seeing a lot of claims, and I'm going to open it up to have you all be able to ask me whatever questions might be coming up and how we can best counter them. So first of all, let's dive into what's happened over the last, see, most people would probably say 72 hours, but that's the exact point of this. It did not start 72 hours ago. And while everyone in the world turned on their TVs or opened up their brains to Israel on Monday morning, this reality in Jerusalem has been happening for nearly a month. So let's understand what's been happening. I'm going to start by going back to Ramadan. Tonight is the last night of Ramadan. So let's go back a month. At the start of Ramadan. Ramadan historically has been a time where tensions rise and usually violence increases in Israel between the Palestinians and the Israelis, specifically centered in the old city of Jerusalem and around the areas of Damascus Gate and the Temple Mount. So if we go back a month to around April 13th when Ramadan was starting, what we also see is increasing kind of hints of incitement coming from the Palestinian Authority and Hamas. But more importantly, what really kind of starts this whole thing off is something called the TikTok challenge. Yes, I am talking about TikTok. Yes, it is ridiculous. But there was a TikTok challenge, which is a social media app that all of you young people know, social media app where basically Arabs in Jerusalem were being encouraged to beat up Jews and film it and put it on TikTok. Now you might not have heard about that, but that's really what started much of the tension that we are now seeing in Jerusalem. So we had this week where these minor attacks kept happening and they were being filmed and put online. And that caused some wingers in Israel, and specifically a very far right-wing fringe organization in Israel, to plan a rally in Jerusalem against the violence, to kind of say to the Arabs, you can, try to beat us up, but we're going to be here and we're going to be in your face. And literally, as part of this, some were saying that they should go and beat up Arabs. So we've got these extremes on both sides. Now, let's be very clear, by the way, when I say extremes on both sides, I'm in no way implying that the Israeli extreme is equivalent to the Palestinian extreme. The Palestinian extreme is up here. They're firing rockets. They kill innocent people. They target innocent people. Their modus operandi has been terrorism consistently. With the Jews, with the Israelis, yeah, we have Jewish terrorists. They are few and far between. They are not bolstered by the society. They are condemned by Israeli society. They are marginalized in Israeli society. So there's a difference. Now, so our side brings out this rally that turns into a riot in Jerusalem. And what ends up happening is they're going up against Israeli police. And on the other side, you have Arabs who are also going up against Israeli police. And the Israeli police are almost standing in the middle, trying to prevent this from exploding if these two sides meet. You have tear gas, flashbangs being used against the Arabs. You have Jews being, corralled and some hit by police. It was bad. And again, this goes back to like April 20th that this was happening. So the tension is already starting to build. Meanwhile, because of that, you have the Israeli police who are trying to limit the amount of gatherings that are happening at places like the Damascus Gate to try to prevent potential escalation. And so the first clashes were this first time that they tried to prevent it. Then you have about a week later, another incident where they're hanging out at Damascus Gate. And by the way, I actually can corroborate what I'm about to say because my friend was there. He loves to go to these places and be right in the center of all the craziness. And he was there that night. And he saw as everyone was just hanging out at Damascus Gate. And then people started to throw rocks and bottles at the police, and clashes begin. And the police have to clear the area yet again. And this is happening consistently throughout the month of April. Now, there's also something happening. Two things are happening in the background. The first thing is Palestinian elections. Now, back in December, the Palestinian Authority announced that they were going to have elections. They actually made a lot of progress. They agreed to election terms. Most thought up until about late March that these elections were going to happen. But then Fatah started to realize that Mahmoud Abbas in particular, I should say, started to realize that he wasn't going to win this election because his faction of Fatah has split now into 3 different factions, which means that even if they won a majority of the vote, if it's split 20%, 20%, 20%, and Hamas gets 40%, Hamas is going to win the election, which is most likely what was going to happen according to polls. So Mahmoud Abbas in the back of his head knows that he's going to be postponing this election and he's going to announce this postponement. And so we also see that in late April, April 23rd, we see that Fatah starts to increase their calls for violence in Jerusalem. And they start to put out this messaging on their social media platforms saying to the Palestinians, Al-Aqsa, the mosque, is under attack. We have to do something about Al-Aqsa. Go fight for Al-Aqsa. And let's understand also the history of that. The history of that goes back to 1929. Haj Amin al-Husseini used this same line, we need to save Al-Aqsa, to cause the riots that led to the Hebron massacre in 1929. In 2000, leading up to the Second Intifada, save Al-Aqsa, they're taking Al-Aqsa. Ariel Sharon walks on the Temple Mount, bam. Second Intifada starts. So this isn't new. They know that using Al-Aqsa is a way to rally extreme people and young, passionate people to start rioting against Israeli police because they're being told that they're being threatened, even though there's no threat. So we have now Fatah propaganda chiming in. Very quickly, Hamas is also going to chime in because they are rivals and they fight with each other and they both want to claim, oh, we're doing this, we're leading this. So Hamas jumps in with their propaganda. Tensions are on an all-time high. That's backdrop number one. Backdrop number two, Sheikh Jarrah, something that maybe a week ago none of you had ever heard of, and now is headline news around the world, right? Sheikh Jarrah is a community in Jerusalem. So now I'm gonna go on a quick tangent, okay? And I'm veering off the timeline for a second, and I want to tell you all the timeline of Sheikh Jarrah, okay? So we all have this information. The Sheikh Jarrah is a neighborhood. I'm using the Arab name for the neighborhood. The Jewish name for the neighborhood is Nachlat Shimon. The neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah Nachlat Shimon is where Shimon HaTzadik, or we call him, I think, Simon the Just in English. This is who was a high priest back in Second Temple period in about the 3rd century before the Common Era, who was a great high priest in the Jewish tradition. And he's buried in that area. So in 1875, Jews in this area bought that land from Arabs. And we know that because there are verifiable land records that show this. So they bought the land, Jews moved into the land and lived there. And then comes 1948 and it's the War of Independence. And during the War of Independence, the Jordanians take control over Eastern Jerusalem, and they take control over the neighborhood of Nachlat Shimon, Sheikh Jarrah, and they expel the Jews, right? Because the Jordanians ethnically cleansed all of the West Bank and Jerusalem, East Jerusalem, of Jews. So they ethnically cleansed the Jews from this area, and the war ends. Now, let's acknowledge these Jews end up becoming refugees in Israel. And meanwhile, we all know that there were refugees from the War of Independence, Arab refugees who ended up in Eastern Jerusalem. Those refugees were then given the ability, told by the Jordanians and the UN, to move into these homes in Sheikh Jarrah. So they move into the homes in the 1950s. They're told maybe at some point we'll try to transfer the land and the ownership over to you. It never happens. Comes 1967, Israel gains control of that area. And in 1970, Israel passes a law that in Jerusalem, if Jews have land that they can prove ownership over in what was Jordanian controlled areas, they can now claim that land. So in 1973, the organization that owns that land that is now in question in Sheikh Jarrah registers that land with the municipality. And a legal battle begins because there are people living on the land. So 9 years go by, and in 1982, an order comes down acknowledging that the ownership of the land is Jewish, those Jews own the land. There are verifiable, authenticated documents that show that, and that and orders the Arabs living there to pay rent. And by the way, the Arabs living there until today signed this court order acknowledging that this land is under the Jewish ownership and that they're going to pay rent. So they acknowledge this. Then they don't pay rent. 20 more years go by. It's 2003. And the organization that owned the land sells the land to another organization. Now, this second organization has a political agenda. Their political agenda is to re-Judaize East Jerusalem, to try to get more Jews into these Arab neighborhoods of East Jerusalem and slowly try to drive the Arabs out. And I'm just being honest. That's what this organization does. I'm not trying to be, to beat around the bush here. So they buy this land. They know there are Arabs living there. So this goes back to court. We own the land now. We bought it from these guys. These people are supposed to be paying rent. They're not paying rent. So it goes into another legal battle. Now, during this legal battle, the court rules actually to a certain extent in favor of the families, because there's a law that's because they live there, they can't be kicked out. However, they do have to pay rent because they're living on land that they don't own. So that was the order that came down. Now years have gone by, no rent has been paid, which now gave the organization the ability to go back to the courts and say, no rent is being paid. And the courts are now, it's gone up the chain that there's going to be these evictions, and it's gone all the way up to the Supreme Court in Israel. And this is a backdrop to everything that I'm talking about, because a month ago, it was announced that the court order, the verdict from the high court, is going to come down within the next 30 days. That was about a month ago. So there was an expectation that by this week, the verdict would have come down, and most likely the high court would have ruled that these families needed to be evicted. So that's another backdrop. And so what's happened recently is more flare-ups also in Sheikh Jarrah. And specifically, again, one that was also very much provoked by right-wing Jewish nationalists in Israel, and specifically a parliamentarian in Israel named Itamar Ben-Gvir, who decided to go and stand and set up a little fake parliament office, his own little office, right in front of a home where the very few Jews who actually live in Sheikh Jarrah, because this is an ongoing thing that Jews are trying to move into Sheikh Jarrah, setting it up right in front of their home, right across from an iftar meal that was happening. A break fast of Ramadan. You take Jewish nationalists, far right Jewish nationalists, and you take the Arabs, Palestinians of Sheikh Jarrah, and you put them across the street from each other. You're asking for something to happen. And it did. Slowly comments were made and things happen and people get up and you see them getting up in each other's faces. Somebody sprays some mace, another person sprays mace, bam, turns into a riot. Chairs are being thrown, rocks are being thrown, tables are being thrown. It turned crazy. So that's another backdrop of everything that's happening is Sheikh Jarrah. Our high court, thank God for our high court, they came out in the beginning of this week and said, we are postponing our verdict. We are not going to rule on this right now because things are crazy. And the last thing we want to do is cause more tension and fan the flames. So that's been postponed. But the craziest part is that the rhetoric, it's literally, we have US representatives of Congress coming out posting as if the evictions have already happened. So the amount of misinformation out there about what's actually going on is remarkable. Okay, that's just something to know. These evictions have not happened yet. No one has been moved from their homes in Sheikh Jarrah over this time period. Okay, let's get to the meat of it, right? That was last week in Sheikh Jarrah. What happened? It happened on Thursday. Friday, the last Friday of Ramadan, the Palestinians, the Arabs are up on the Temple Mount praying. As they're leaving their prayers, they start to throw rocks and bottles and stuff at the soldiers, at the police. The police then go up onto the Temple Mount to stop the riot. They defuse the situation, but it's the first time they actually go up onto the mountain. Tensions cool. Saturday, nothing happens. This Sunday evening, as again, the break fast was approaching, renewed riots from the Temple Mount. Rocks were being thrown again at police, bottles were being thrown at police, fireworks were being used against police, and a firework even went up into a tree, which are those images that you've seen on social media of that tree burning on the Temple Mount. And Jews, by the way, who are celebrating Sunday night, Jerusalem Day, are celebrating the fact that this fire is going on Al-Aqsa. Okay. Comes Monday morning. And tensions are at an all-time high. It's Jerusalem Day. And the Palestinians, the Muslims on the Temple Mount, are preparing for a riot. When I say preparing, I mean they have literally stockpiled rocks and boulders and fireworks and all sorts of stuff. Inside of Al-Aqsa, they've stockpiled this to, after prayers, cause a riot, during prayers. So what we understand happened on Monday morning was they started to throw rocks over the wall down onto worshipers down on the Western Wall Plaza. And that's what led, and then rocks again at the police, which led the police onto the Temple Mount. Then now they're facing the rioters head on, and rioters are running into Al-Aqsa to take shelter. So eventually, our police entered the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And that was all that needed to happen. The spark was ignited, and it spread around the world. As now Muslims around the world believe that Israel, unprovoked, has stormed the Temple Mount and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Unprovoked, because that's when everyone turned their cameras on, right? That's when everyone turned on the news. No one knew everything that I was just telling you that happened in the 3 weeks prior. So this riot happens. We are now being blasted on social media. Jerusalem Day continues. But then Hamas chimes in. And Hamas says, if you don't vacate the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Temple Mount by 6 p.m., we're going to attack. And now we're in a war. Because at 6:10 p.m. on Monday night, Hamas fired their first rocket at Jerusalem. They proceeded to fire 7 rockets at Jerusalem. And then from that moment on, they have bombarded the south with rocket fire. We're talking about 48 hours of almost nonstop rocket fire. We're talking about literally the entire south of Israel being in bomb shelters. That happens Monday night. Monday night, Israel then retaliates and bombs targets in Gaza, striking Hamas terror targets in Gaza. We hear about some innocent casualties, somewhere around 9, not sure exactly who and what, not verifiable yet. Yesterday, rockets continue. Last night, they increase the amount and they increase the range to now Tel Aviv, Herzliya, Holon, Rishon LeZion, Lod, Ramle, and rockets are falling all over the center of Israel. And so here we are now. And rockets, literally since we've been talking, I mean, there's been rockets being launched into Israel. And we're waiting right now for rockets to be launched yet again into Tel Aviv, because in the last 24 hours, Israel has now killed 6 Hamas commanders have been killed in Gaza. And we expect a retaliation for that. Where do we go from here? According to our leaders in Israel, there's no end in sight. The casualties. In Gaza, we have reports of about 53 casualties. We don't know how many of them are terrorists and how many of them are innocent civilians. In Israel, we have 7 innocent people who have now lost their lives. 2 women in Ashkelon died from because the Iron Dome malfunctioned. There was a direct hit on a home in Ashkelon that killed 2 women. Last night, a direct hit on a bus killed a woman in Rishon LeZion. Late last night, in the middle of the night, at around 3 a.m, there was another direct hit in Lod that killed a father and his daughter. Arabs, by the way, in that circumstance, they were Arab Israelis. And today, an Israeli soldier was killed when he was driving in his car, and an anti-tank missile was launched directly at the vehicle. And I know I'm missing, the saddest one. They're all sad, I'm sorry. But just recently, an hour ago, a boy from Sderot, who also's home apartment took a direct hit. He died of his wounds. Sorry, yes, it was a military vehicle. My apologies. Andrew, thank you for the correction. So a 7-year-old has now died of his wounds from the attack earlier today in Sderot. Lastly, Arab Israelis, for really, I would say one of the first times ever, are going after Jewish Israelis in towns that are mixed. Lod, Ramle, we've seen rioting, we've seen synagogues being burned, we've seen attacks on Jewish stores like Judaica stores, we've seen attacks on Jews in the streets. In the north, Jews who really often drive through the Arab communities of the north, which again, Jews and Arabs have lived in the north side by side since the founding of the state of Israel. Their cars were being pelted with stones. It's been a lot. And then of course, I've neglected to mention this all day today. It's so hard to list everything that's happened, but there was also an attempted lynching that I'm sure many of us saw on the outskirts of the old city where somebody who was on his way to the Jerusalem Day celebrations was trying to drive around the old city by Lion's Gate, and he was being pelted with stones and lost control of his vehicle, drove up on the curb. They tried to pull him out of his car, and luckily a police officer who was nearby saw what was happening right in that moment, ran over, started to shoot his gun in the air, didn't kill anyone, and stood there with the guy who was going to be lynched behind him, and held off the rioters until they were able to get more reinforcements. So that's the briefing. It's I tried to be as comprehensive as possible. There's so many little things, but I think really the crucial piece of all of this is to show people that this didn't start on Monday morning, to show people that us going up on the Temple Mount and going into Al-Aqsa was not an unprovoked attack, that Sheikh Jarrah has nothing to do with any of this. It's being used as an excuse to cause more violence, and that the backdrop of all of this is those elections. And the Palestinians were successful. Nobody's talking about it. The Palestinians aren't talking about it. And now what we're also seeing is Fatah, who was gaining support because of, fight against Al-Aqsa, and people like that. They say, oh, they're steering, they're fighting against Israel, we're going to support them. And Hamas also wanted support. So Fatah has been doing what they've been doing, encouraging the violence. Hamas then needs to jump in and start firing rockets at Israel. And then who also needs to jump in, because it turns into a pissing contest? Palestinian Islamic Jihad. So now the Israelis are also stuck in the middle of this power battle that's taking place amongst the Palestinian leadership. So there's a lot going on, and it's very hard to follow in real time what's going on. So before I jump into any questions, I want to just give you some tools to follow along. Stand With Us has a Telegram running notification group that you can join. Maybe Rafi, while I'm speaking, will grab the link and put it in the chat for everyone if it's not already there, but you can then download that on your phone, and you can get literally minute by minute updates from Stand With Us on what's going on. And our updates come from the police, from Magen David Adom, and from the IDF. So, and we always verify before we post. So that's one way to get minute by minute information, but by a reliable source. And then I would say, follow those social media accounts, Stand With Us and many others, and share the information that's being put out there to the best of your ability. It's not always about countering the false negative information by commenting on their stuff and correcting it. It's very oftentimes also just getting our messages out there. And people need to know that there is a lot more to this story. And people need to know that what BBC is not telling them, which is, yes, we've bombed Gaza, but we bombed Gaza after Israel had dealt with barrages of missiles, and specifically missiles launched at our capital. So that's the last thing I want to say. But thank you all so much for attending this briefing. And check out the Stand With Us website. We're continuously updating with fact sheets and information. So thank you all so much. And
thank you.
Deep breath, and let's pray for quiet times in Israel. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful
Thanks very much, Carla. Before everyone just leaves us, if you are a student and you're interested in this sort of thing, Israel activism and Israel education, dealing with anti-Semitism, our Emerson Fellowship is now open for the next academic year, 21/22. Much everyone for joining us today.